Hello everyone. In today's video I want to talk about my compost strategy for this next 6 months and then going forward from there, but most importantly over this sort of winter and into next sort of spring. And to do that, I know I've given some information before on that, but I must go back over that for the completeness of this video. So the first couple of minutes will be information that you've already heard before we get into the juicy stuff. Now, we all know that peat has got to come out of the system. We all know the damage that's doing by that being dug up and used by gardeners. And as a result of that, I've done some calculations and it's worked out that the horticultural industry as a whole use 60 million 50-litre bags this sort of size that are behind me here. 60 million of that in this country alone, and that's a colossal amount. Now the problem comes with what that is going to be replaced with from once that's stopped over this next year, and the ingredients that are going to be used for that. Because it's such a colossal amount, I know there are a lot of peat-free alternatives on the market at the moment, and many of you are using them and using them with effect. Some, like myself, don't get on with it at all, and we've all got to change. But the problem is when there's that amount of ingredients that need to be found, I think a lot of standards will slip. And because competition for those ingredients, for the good ingredients to go and make a good compost, because that competition is going to increase, the price is going to skyrocket. So it makes more common sense for you to make your own compost, which is what I've started to do now on a much larger scale than I have previously. And I do think that that is vital. So anyway, over this last sort of 20 months, I've tested, I think it was about 18 and 19 different peat-free composts, and not one of them compared to this stuff behind me, which unfortunately is peat. I've bought this stuff behind me to see me over this next sort of 2 to 3 years, myself and a friend. And we know this is peat based, but this is our last hurrah, so to speak. I've got recipes for seed and potting on compost from when I was a child. They're still in my head, I still know them because I made it so often. But I need to collect the ingredients for that, which I'll be doing over this next 6 months, and then start to put those mixes together, test them, make sure they work properly, and then I'm able to release them so people can start using them. But chiefly, of course, I'm doing it for myself. I want to replace this stuff, you know, and still have a usable compost moving forward. So that's the sort of idea with the track and the train of thoughts of today. What I'm doing is making vast amounts of compost and as quickly as possible. So again, something you've seen before is this is my cold composting heap, and I ran a little poll about a week ago on my Instagram account and on my YouTube account, just a little tiny poll just to see what people thought about composting and making it on their plot or in the garden. Because there's a couple of ways to do it. You can just pile everything in and let nature take its course, and over 18 months you will get compost out. It will just take a long time. And there are people like myself, although I haven't done it with this one this year, who turn the compost regularly and get compost out much quicker and of a much better quality. If you put that effort and work into it, you'll get a much better quality product out at the end of it. And it was around about the 60 to 70% mark of people who just chuck it in. Some people have various methods. I even saw one method where one person actually composted it and put it in bags all around the garden so it was ready to use as mulch, which is a brilliant idea. People are using Daleks or different types and they turn it, or otherwise they don't. But this is my cold compost heap, and as yet I haven't turned it, but I will do through the winter. Now, in that compost heap at the front of the plot that we've just looked at, only good vegetative matter and cardboard and stuff goes in there. I don't put any weeds in there in case the weeds take root, and I don't put any weeds in there in case, again, they're in seed and they deposit seed in there, because the temperature doesn't get hot enough to kill those weed seeds and doesn't necessarily kill the roots, so you can be spreading weeds. This is my bad compost heap, and all of my weeds go on here. Any of the rubbish that I don't want in my good compost heap at the front goes in here. But this is set to change. This is all this year's weeds down here, and hopefully you can just see it. This is all this year's stuff, and this is it rotted down after a couple of years. The aim is to put all that on top of there, fold all those nettles in, which are growing out of this bad compost heap. All these nettles around here are coming out of it. Fold all them in, and then I'll cap it. I'll put like a tarpaulin over the top, and I will just leave that to sit for a couple of years. After a couple of years, I should be able to spread this somewhere down here, so I'm not spreading the weeds, in a controlled area where I can use it to grow plants, but not necessarily spread weeds all over the plot. But as I say, I'm moving on from this now, and I've got something else now which should hopefully replace this current system that I'm using. So this is my hot bin composter, and I've been given this to test, review, and to feed back information to the company about its use. And I have to say, I am absolutely staggered by it, absolutely delighted. I know they're pricey, and I'll let you find out the price on your own and sit down, have a cup of tea with you or something stronger. They're not cheap, but what they do is produce a lot of compost, 750 litres in one go. And if you get the mix right and get this composting right, it will make that very, very quickly in a couple of months. So you can get multiple mixes on. And if compost is a tenner a throw next year, save you a lot of money in the end. But this heats up very, very quickly. I've had this going for just over a week now. I'm going to open it now and see if the cameras will pick up the steam that this produces. Hopefully that is evidence. And it's just a mix, the same as normal composting, of greens and browns, and getting that mix right and mixing it up and letting nature take its course. Now, I've got a whole barrow full of stuff in there. That's all going in there today, and that will just about top it off. But of course it keeps sinking, so you've got to keep feeding your materials in there to make sure that you get or keep that warm through the winter months. So I've got a couple of strategies and things I'm going to be doing to keep that alive. So this hot bin is essentially made of polystyrene, but I've no doubt in my mind that they've got some sort of a resin mixed in with this to keep this as good as it looks now for a long period of time. It's very, very tough and solid, and unless you start putting a garden fork in it, you're not going to be making holes in this. And you know, it's designed to fit together so that it holds itself, and there's just a couple of ratchet straps to hold it all together. These pieces come off inside panels and front panels. It's very well designed, and it's about 3 inches thick. And that's the key with this. You can make hot compost, and probably many of you are already thinking, well, just put a couple of pallets together, Steve, like I've done at the front, work it well and you'll get hot compost. And yes, that will work, but it's not as efficient as this, simply because this is the insulating factor on the outside that's holding that heat in and allows you to maintain those higher temperatures for longer. And that's what I like about this. And I'm taking this idea and running with it now, and I'm going to make something else now which hopefully will project my composting forward. So let's go and have a look at that. So this is what I've come up with, and it's an insulated composting area with inside my polytunnel. A couple of years ago, my first year on YouTube, I built a hotbed in the small polytunnel over there, and it didn't quite work out. I was wanting it for other uses, but I'm hoping to combine this with the use that I wanted that for also. But that's a longer term project. Right now what I want is somewhere to hot compost lots of material, because the plot is now sort of coming to this season's end, and there's going to be a lot of material lying round. I mean, I'll show you a little clip of outside of all my flowers and stuff. A lot of those have gone over now, and the rest will be following within the next couple of weeks. That's an awful lot of material that I can just chop up. I'll fetch it in the wheelbarrow, chop it up and load this up and fill this up, get this hot. And over the winter, there is always sources of materials. Even in the winter, grass still grows, so go out and cut a verge with your lawnmower, get the fresh grass cuttings, brilliant for heating heaps up. Collect newspapers and cardboard from your friends, family and neighbours. Ask if you can raid their bins if they're still cutting their grass. You can easily fill a space like this very easily without thinking too hard or without doing too much work. I'll give you a closer look in a minute, but what this is flooring insulation, and it's 50mm thick, or in old money that's 2 inches thick, and I've got 2 layers of it together, so this is 4 inches thick. So it's actually 1 inch thicker than the hot bin out there, but I doubt that this is as efficient as the hot bin because of the way that's been designed and made. This is more of a temporary kind of a structure. None of these pieces are glued together, none of these are fixed, they're just held by cheap straps which you can pick up off Amazon. And I think I bought 4 of these straps to go around this, and I think they're about 12-13 quid, something like that. So it, all in all, this thing has cost £100, and it's a gamble that's worth it. I've kept this sheet size and everything as big as possible, just basically cutting them in half, simply because later on I can adjust if I need to. I can make them shorter. I'm already going to cut the front bit shorter. I'll put them in layers as the compost heap builds, so I can still get in and manipulate the heap and mix it up. But we'll cover that more when we come to the actual filling on another day. But I've kept the sheet size big because if this doesn't work, and I think it will, I'm about 95% certain it will, if it doesn't, then these sheets can go home and I can insulate my shed with it, which is a job that's half done. So I'm not losing anything. It's not a massive risk, and then just putting it to the back of a shed because I can't use it. It will have another use, but I think it will work anyway. And I'll give you a closer look at it now, I think, yeah. So it actually looks taller than it is because at the bottom there we're on a raised bed, and I've put it on a pallet to make sure it's nice and flat ground that the polystyrene's going into, so there are no stones or anything sticking up into the polystyrene to put holes in it. So that's almost a foot raised, and why it looks so big, it would actually only come up to about here if it was straight on the ground. It'd be much more of a manageable size. It is still big anyway, and I estimate that I'm going to get about 1400 litres of compost. And you can see I've just cut these pieces into the corners and they're just held in by this strap, and to help me assemble it I just stuck a spade in the ground to hold that side upright while I put a strap around, and I'll have 4 of those straps around it eventually, and this will be my front access point. Later on, once I find out how well this works and it's anything that I need to do with it, I might have a hatch at the bottom where I can access the compost. But I think initially I'm going to have 2 doors at the front coming up to about half height, and then for full height, so that I can still get in to mix the compost up. So you're probably wondering why I've put it in right in the middle of my polytunnel. I mean, 2 days ago I had my Ildi tomatoes growing here. They've finished. I took the trusses off, and I figured, well, if I put it in here, the compost that it makes this winter, and I'm hoping to empty this before Christmas, I can just spread it across these 2 beds, making these 2 beds no dig. So that's brilliant. And then I can move that once I know its limitations, and once I know what else I need to do with it, I can make those changes, and then this can go outside or go sit in another tunnel or something. But it just enables me to fetch stuff in a wheelbarrow, chop it up, pop it in, all in the dry and the warmth, and as I say, later on I can spread it out. Now, something else I'm hoping to do with this later is to put a rack on the top and use the heat that's generated from this to germinate seeds next spring. So that's a longer term project, and that is where I'm aiming with this, so I'm getting further use out of the heat that's generated in there. So all in all, it's a fantastic proposition for me, super exciting. And if you watched me on the potty melt last night, you'll have seen me getting a bit excited about it, because these things do get to me eventually. But one of the major things is, for me, is that I'm blighted with weeds here, the same as every gardener is. And what I'm hoping is down the line, because this gets so phenomenally hot in there, is that I can put weeds and all in here, And through the season, while things are growing away nicely on your plot, all the weeds that I pull out can go straight in there and go back into compost. And that is brilliant. If we can do that, then everything has a use, but it's much quicker. That cold compost heap of mine down the back of the bad heap, that's been there for about 3 years. That could be a growing space, because this space is reducing all them weeds within a matter of months, as opposed to leaving it for a couple of years. So that's my take on it, why I was getting so excited last night, why I'm super excited now, and I think it's a marvellous step forward for me. And I'm going to combine this eventually with my potting mixes. These will be my compost sources for my potting mixes, with the other ingredients that I need to collect together to make them moving forward. And eventually that will replace that pile of compost that I've had to buy in the meantime, whilst I find a way to get myself around it. So this is my composting strategy for the next 6 months. And so now, during this last 20 months, I've said on many occasions I've been testing peat free composts, and I've tested 18, 19 of them, somewhere around there. But whilst I've been doing that and going around and trying to access these different bags of compost, I've been speaking to nursery owners, people who actually grow the plants within those nurseries, and I've discovered a lot of frightening things. Now, for instance, did you know that most of the wood fibre that you'll find within compost in this country at present actually comes to this country on a massive ship from Canada? Now, it starts to become less environmentally good and interesting when you find out that those products are being shipped from overseas to this country that is a wooded isle anyway and has a wood industry. Why isn't that being used in compost? I grant you there are companies who are probably using British ingredients, but there are many that aren't. Now, something I didn't know until just recently, I knew of black peat and I knew about brown peat, but I'd never heard of white peat. And the way a peat bog works is at the top is your white peat, then you've got your brown and then your black. I always just thought it was brown and black. But white peat is being imported from places like Latvia, so your Eastern Bloc countries. And that's going into compost mixes, but it's not being labelled as peat because it's not the black peat. It's not that stuff. So I think and I believe that it's the black peat that holds the carbon that we're all so concerned about. The white peat, not so much. But the Eastern Bloc countries are digging up the white peat and it's ending up in our compost on our shores and not labelled as peat. So that's another thing that we need to be aware of and find out more about. Say, I've got very limited information, and a lot of it is sort of hearsay, whispers, that sort of thing, and a lot of it isn't good. So that bag of compost that you're buying is peat free and you'll think, oh, I'm doing my bit for the environment. It might not be so. Another one for you, another interesting fact of a company is making peat free compost and peat compost. If they do a run on their machines with the peat compost going through it and bagging it up at the end, the machine isn't cleaned before that makes your peat free compost. So your peat free compost will have the residue from the previous run of compost that went through it, the peat. So your peat free compost might have peat in it anyway, just simply from the bagging process of that. So you start adding these things together and it starts to think, well, it's not so sustainable and environmentally friendly as you first thought. Another one from me, coir, comes from India. How many thousands of miles is that to travel, and what is the carbon footprint of that? I know, or I've heard of one company that have got a set of containers, the big shipping containers, that are constantly shipping back to India, backwards and forwards. They're sending out foundry sand, and those containers are coming back full of coir. Now, if they don't use all the coir in their present batch of compost, they stockpile it. And the other compost companies are trying to buy it because they've got a bit of a bottleneck on the coir buying process. And Other compost companies are trying to buy it, but they're stockpiling it for their own use moving forward, or they might sell it at a higher premium price later on. Other companies are struggling to keep up. So there's all this going on behind the scenes, and I just wonder really how environmentally friendly these peat free products actually are, and whether it's just kind of in name only. I mean, I've no doubt that many of the peat free companies out there will have full marketing blurb that says they are totally sustainable and eco-friendly, and you read it and say, oh yeah, it must be true. But just think on a bit where that stuff's coming from. What we really want is peat free compost that's produced in this country from British products. And it's the same for every country. In America, they should be made from American products that you've got freely available. For every country that you live in, it should be made there. It shouldn't be shipped all around the world. Let's get away from that. Let's make and keep these products local. So I hope you got something from today's video. I've got lots of things coming up on compost and composting and various things that I'm going to be doing it all the way through into next summer really. And I'm looking forward and hoping that this works, but I wouldn't go out and just buy all this stuff straight away just because Steve's doing it. It must be all right. It is a test, it is a trial, and I want to see where it goes first. Let's see if it works and find out its pitfalls before anyone starts spending the money. I mean, I'm doing this so you don't have to. I think it will work. I'm about 95% certain it will be good. We've got to see really what the results say. So the best way really to follow on with that is just to make sure you subscribe. It's the big red button just down there. If you hit that, then you're not going to miss any of my future content, and you'll see the results of this, and you'll see me mixing up compost for my own recipes that I used many years ago, and lots of other compost related content that will be coming up over the next 6 months to a year as well. So it's well worth being part of Green Side Up just for that. But for now, that's it. Look after yourselves, everyone. Please take care, stay safe, and I'll see you all very soon. Ta-ra now.